The young thespian's Remorse. It's about that first play in grammar school that a lot of us had to be a part of. It's about how I avoided the whole situation. By the end of the story, I did end up being the center of attention. It just wasn't the way I wanted to be the star of the show. The young thespian's Remorse. It's based on my memories from when I was 9 years old in 1961. Mrs. Fastener had just finished assigning the girls their parts in this year's class play. I dreaded this part of fourth grade, and there was no way I wanted to participate, other than maybe playing a tree in the forest or maybe a rock. Our teachers started to ask for volunteers from the boys, and only a couple raised their hands. She assigned some secondary acting parts, but she still needed the star character, Peter Cottontail, a.k.a. Peter Rabbit. Well, there wasn't any way that I was going to be hopping around the stage with a big fluffy white tail stuck to my butt, so I slumped down into my seat and almost disappeared totally behind my desk. Still hunched down, I looked over, and there was Sharon Taylor looking at me with a big smile on her face. I sat up a little and smiled back. Sharon was the girl I liked the most in class, and she had taken the part of Mrs. Rabbit for our play, The Tale of Peter Rabbit. Mrs. Fastener was asking again for a volunteer for the Peter Rabbit character, but there still weren't any takers. Sharon was motioning me with her head for me to raise my hand, and when her smile became overpowering, I felt emboldened. When I came out of my trance, my hand was raised and Miss Fastener was saying, "Thank you, David. You'll make a fine Peter Rabbit." I had forced a smile on my face, and I tried to act like I was glad to have been given the part. I nodded over to Sharon, and she smiled. That afternoon, we started rehearsing, and it wasn't quite as bad as I thought it would be. Of course, there was only Mrs. Fastener in the audience, and everybody else, except for the kids playing trees and rocks, had rabbit ears and cottontails stuck on, so it didn't seem that terrible. I was hopping around with the best of them, and my lines were pretty simple to remember, so I had no worries. This was going to be a piece of cake, and besides, Sharon had a new respect for me. We rehearsed a number of times again before the grand opening, and Sharon and I were becoming quite the stars. We were laughing between takes, and I couldn't have hoped for a better way to impress her. The weekend came, and I totally forgot about the class play. I woke up very early on Monday, the day of the big play, and I was sweating profusely. I was having a panic attack. Stage fright had taken over as I envisioned a packed auditorium of proud parents and potentially mocking schoolmates. I decided to use my sweating as a good cover for not going to school. I called my mom, who was already dressed up and ready for her son's big day on the stage, and moaned, "Mom, I'm feeling sick to my stomach." She picked up my official NFL wastebasket and put it next to my head beside the bed, and then put her hand on my forehead. She didn't like what she felt and went to get the thermometer. I didn't have a temperature, so she advised me to rest a little while and see if I felt any better when it was time to get up. After she left the room, I started moaning and groaning like I'd never done before. I put on an act right there in the bed that could have won an Academy Award. It wasn't long before I could hear her calling the school. When I went back to school the next day, I was describing to my classmates how sick I had been. I was much more graphic when telling the boys, and they seemed to eat it right up. I wanted to be sure that everyone, especially Sharon, believed me. During recess, the more I described how sick I had been, the woozier I began to feel. When I got back to the classroom and I sat down, I saw Sharon, and she was making eyes at Eddie Brinkman. It seems that Eddie had stood in for me the day of the play, and now he and Sharon were best of friends. I was really feeling sick now, but before I could get up to leave, I reared back and then let hurl my lunch, breakfast, and bits of last night's dinner. It wasn't pretty, and that day lived on in infamy for the rest of fourth grade. I never again had to worry about impressing Sharon, because she hardly ever looked at me after that. In a way, I was the star of the show, just not in the way I would have preferred.
Don't wanna be no superstar. Don't Don't wanna be your honey pie. Don't wanna live that life.